On October 5th, 1813, bugles sounded the charge in remote woods in British Canada. A battalion of mounted Kentucky riflemen galloped to the attack, shouting a strange battle cry.
It's one of the most iconic war chants in American history. And people hear about, they hear this, remember the Raisin. I don't think a lot of Americans really know where that comes from, but it's a rallying cry for soldiers.
What the American soldiers were remembering had happened about 9 months earlier. On the January morning after the battles of the River Raisin, a group of native warriors entered Frenchtown. Within hours, many wounded American prisoners were dead. Kentuckian William Atherton was one of the men in Frenchtown that morning who survived.
Some of our company so badly wounded they could scarcely be moved in their beds. Poor fellows, they were inhumanely butchered.
Through a stroke of luck, Atherton's life was spared. Yet it would be changed forever.
An Indian took me to the back of a house, put a blanket around me, and gave me a hat, making signs to march on.
He didn't know it yet, but William Atherton had just been adopted into the Potawatomi Nation.
A number of Indians came into the settlement, found the Kentucky wounded still there, began ransacking the buildings they were in, and eventually began killing or taking away as prisoner many of those wounded Kentuckians. This is usually described as the massacre of the River Raisin.
Things may be manipulated sometimes to tell a story a certain way. When Indians did win a battle, it was called a massacre. When the U.S. won a battle, it was called a victory. And the Indians were always portrayed as the savages. We were the farthest thing from savages.
After the battle was over, they did as had happened to them many times. They mutilated. They did things that we wish had not happened.
It didn't take long for Americans to call for revenge. Captain Robert McAfee of Kentucky wrote,
"The bleaching bones of the unburied dead still appealed to heaven. They called on Kentucky to avenge this outrage on humanity."
In the first battle of the River Raisin, the Kentuckians take the native bodies, they scalp them, and they bayonet them almost into oblivion.
Ottawa Chief Blackbird noted,
"The Big Knives have themselves to blame. Whenever they get our people into their hands, they cut them like meat into small pieces. We thought white people were Christians. They ought to show us a better example."
The native people find some of the American bodies left on the field, and they strip and scalp them too. So neither side comes out as anything but savage.
When Americans learned about the killings in Frenchtown, the slogan, "Remember the Raisin," galvanized the fledgling nation. Men eagerly enlisted to avenge the killings. President James Madison called a national day of prayer to remember the victims.
The Battle of the River Raisin was definitely a disaster for American arms. There was a feeling at one point that perhaps we're not going to win this war. And so it was very necessary to build up morale on the frontier. One of the ways that the American government did this was by publicizing what happened at the River Raisin. Not calling it a huge defeat, but rather insisting that this was an atrocity that was perpetrated by the Indians against local settlers, and that the correct response to it would be retaliation.
That October, charging mounted infantry shouted, "Remember the Raisin." The cry echoes through American history. The first, but not last, of its kind. A cry for revenge. Alamo, 1836. The entire garrison in the former mission, including some 200 Texans, is killed by the Mexican army under Santa Anna. Some are executed after they surrender. The brutality of the event spurs a call for Texas independence. A month later, Sam Houston's men shout, "Remember the Alamo," as they smash Santa Ana in the Battle of San Jacinto. In the 1840s, a boy named George Custer grew up near the River Raisin, hearing vivid stories of the battles. In 1868, when he was 29, he led the 7th U.S. Cavalry troops in an attack on a Cheyenne village at the Washita River, killing not only warriors, but women and children. Custer was killed at the Battle of Little Bighorn. But 14 years later, the 7th Cavalry avenged Custer's death at Wounded Knee. Many women and children tried to run away that morning, but American cavalrymen hunted them and shot them down, killing hundreds. It was a massacre. Pearl Harbor, 1941. On the morning of December 7th, Japanese bombers attacked the U.S. naval base in Hawaii without warning or a declaration of war.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
That triggers the American entry into World War II and unites the infuriated nation. Some 120,000 people of Japanese descent, most of them U.S. citizens, are quickly herded into internment camps in desolate places. American war posters often picture the Japanese as subhuman.
In every war, the government will try to encourage its citizens to fight and not give up. They will also try to dehumanize the enemy, to make you think that that other person deserves being killed. Because a lot of people don't naturally want to kill others, but if you make them angry enough, upset enough, maybe you can get them to do that.
It was said, "Remember the Raisin," much like we say, "Remember the Alamo," or we say, "Remember 9/11." They did it to us. It's only right that we do it to them. And so that justification circle just grows larger and larger.
The massacre at Frenchtown was only one act in a long and savage war, with ferocious brutality practiced by both sides. But in 1813, 1868, and 1941, Americans wanted to believe that barbarism was practiced only by their enemies. Perhaps the most unfortunate legacy of the River Raisin was the idea that one side was human and the other was not. It was a lie then, and it always will be.